Hey guys, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be reading 97 to 106 today. So that's the end of part 2. You guys know you have that one pager to do. I'm going to make that due next Wednesday, the 8th, I believe. So that'll give you a little time. So instead of a quiz, you're going to do that one pager. I'll go ahead and I'll put the instructions for the one pager back up on Google Classroom as well. And it looks like you will have a yeah, you will have a discussion board for today, Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and get started reading. Just remember that, if you're fine with reading this on your own and you're understanding it, you don't have to watch the videos. But I do like to somehow connect with you guys just because I miss you, and also just to kind of go through some discussion. I did already read 97, so we're just going to go right to the top of 98 where he tells who did he tell off? Mrs. Bowles. So, he says, at the top of 98, go home. Montag fixed his eyes upon her quietly. Go home and think of your first husband divorced, and your second husband killed in a jet, and your third husband blowing his brains out. Go home and think of the dozens of abortions you've had. Go home and think of that and your damned cesarean sections too, and your children who hate your guts. Go home and think of it all happened and what you did to ever stop it. Go home. Go home, he yelled. Before I knock you down and kick you out the door. So I think that's interesting. This is the 1950s. So the fact that Ray Bradbury is talking about dozens of abortions, like this woman used abortions as some sort of, I guess you would say, birth control. I don't know if he was foreseeing that, in our future as a society. I asked you the other day in discussion board, what is Ray Bradbury saying about kind of the value of human life, and whatever your feelings are on this topic, he definitely has a pretty strong view that in the future we were not going to value human life. Which reminds me, oh my gosh, you guys, okay, today my husband and I were walking in Cedar Creek off Santa Fe, and I was telling him about how a student that her dad lives in Arlington Heights, she told me she was up there hanging out with him over spring break, and people were out walking around, and the cops were stopping them and telling them they weren't allowed to walk. So, I mean, obviously, this society right now, with us not really being outside and things like that, and discouraging us from going and playing basketball with our friends, and in Arlington Heights outside of Chicago, that's what's going on. And obviously that's to protect us from this virus and things like that, and we could get into a debate about it, but I thought that was really interesting. So I mean, it just continues to remind us of some of our society that we have right now in this book. Doors slammed and the house was empty. Montag stood alone in the winter weather, with the parlor walls the color of dirty snow. In the bathroom, water ran. He heard Mildred shake the sleeping tablets into her hand. Fool, Montag, fool, fool. Oh, God, you silly fool. Shut up. He pulled the green bullet from his ear and jammed it into his pocket. It sizzled and fainted. Fool, fool. He searched the house and found the books, where Mildred had stacked them behind the refrigerator. Some were missing, and he knew that she had started on her own slow process of dispersing the dynamite in her house, stick by stick. But he was not angry now, only exhausted and bewildered with himself. He carried the books into the backyard and hid them in the bushes near the alley fence. For tonight only, he thought, in case she decides to do any more burning. He went back through the house. Mildred? He called at the door of the darkened bedroom. There was no sound. Outside, crossing the lawn on his way to work, he tried not to see how completely dark and deserted Clarice McClellan's house was. On the way downtown, he was so completely alone with his terrible error that he felt the necessity for a strange warmness and goodness that came from a familiar and gentle voice speaking in the night. Already, in a few short hours, it seemed that he had known Faber a whole lifetime. Now he knew that he was two people, that he was, above all, Montag, who knew nothing, who did not even know himself a fool, but only suspected it. And he knew that he was also the old man who talked to him and talked to him as the train was sucked from one end of the night city to the other on one long, sickening gasp of motion. In the days to follow, in the nights when there was no moon, in the nights when there was a very bright moon shining on the earth, the old man would go on with this talking and this talking, drop by drop, stone by stone, flake by flake. His mind would well over at last, and he would not be Montag anymore. Yeah.
Can you tell me when you watch your show?
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna watch. Nailed it. That's right. This the old man told him, assured him, promised him he would be Montag plus Faber, fire plus water, and then one day, after everything had mixed and simmered and worked away in silence, there would be neither fire nor water, but wine. Out of the two separate and opposite things, a third. So right now, Montag, he's one person. He's an idiot. He feels dumb. And then on the other hand, he's got Faber talking in his ear. And he said, as time passes, that Montag that Faber has Faber in his ear, and that Montag that knows nothing, they're going to combine and they're going to become perfect. So he feels like he will become a better person. And one day he would look back on the fool and know the fool. Even now he could feel the start of a long journey, the leave taking, the going away from the self he had been. It was good listening to the beetle hum, the sleepy mosquito buzz, and the delicate filigree murmur of the old man's voice, at first scolding him, and then consoling him in the late hour of night as he emerged from the steaming subway towards the firehouse world. Pity, Montag, pity. Don't haggle and don't nag them. You were so recently of them yourself. They are so confident that they will run on forever. But they won't run on forever. They don't know that this is all but one huge, big, blazing meteor that makes a pretty fire in space, but that someday it'll have to hit. They see only the blaze, the pretty fire as you saw it. So he says, when you go into the fire station, Montag, don't go in and tell these guys they're wrong. Understand that you were once just like them a couple days ago. What they believe, they're passionate about, and we just have to kind of chill out for now. Montag, old men who stay at home afraid, tending their peanut brittle bones, have no right to criticize. Yet you almost killed things at the start. Watch it. I'm with you. Remember that. I understand how it happened. I must admit that your blind rage invigorated me. God, how young I felt. But now I want to feel old. I want to feel a little of my cowardice to be distilled in you tonight. The next few hours, when you see Captain Beatty, tiptoe around him. Let me hear him for you. Let me feel the situation out. Survival is our ticket. Forget the poor, silly women. I made them unhappier than they've ever been in years, I think, said Montag. It shocked me to see Mrs. Phelps cry. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's best not to face things, to run, to be happy, to have fun. I don't know. I feel guilty. No, you mustn't. If there were no war, if there was peace in the world, I'd say fine, have fun. But Montag, you mustn't go back to being just a fireman. All isn't well in the world. Montag perspired. Montag? Are you listening? My feet, said Montag. I can't move them. I feel so damn silly. My feet won't move. Listen, easy now, said the old man gently. I know. You're afraid of making mistakes. Don't be. Mistakes can be profited by. Man, when I was younger, I shoved my ignorance in people's faces. They beat me with sticks. By the time I was 40, my blunt instrument had been honed to a fine cutting point for me. If you hide your ignorance, no one will hit you and you'll never learn. Now pick up your feet into the firehouse with you. We're twins. We're not alone anymore. We're not separated out in different parlors with no contact between. If you need help when Beatty pries at you, I'll be sitting right here in your eardrum, making notes. Montag felt his right foot and then his left move. Old man, he said, stay with me. The mechanical hound was gone. Its kennel was empty, and the firehouse stood all about in plaster silence, and the orange salamander slept with its kerosene in its belly, and the fire throwers crossed upon its flanks, and Montag came in through the silence and touched the brass pole and slid up in the dark air, looking back at the deserted kennel, his heart beating, pausing, beating. Faber was a gray moth asleep in his ear for the moment. Remember, guys, when they talk about the salamander, they're talking about the fire truck. So when it says that the salamander was asleep, the fire truck was turned off. The kerosene in its belly is kerosene to like start fires, is within its like mechanisms, like a gas tank. Beatty stood near the hole drop waiting, but with his back toward it, so his back turned as if he were not waiting. Well, he said to the men playing cards, how comes a very strange beast which in all tongues is called a fool? He put his hand to one side, palm up, for a gift. Montag put the book inside of it. Without even glancing at the title, Beatty tossed the book into the trash basket and lit a cigarette. Who are you? Wise the best fools be. Welcome back, Montag. I hope you'll be staying with us, now that your fever is done and your sickness over. Sit in for a hand of poker. They sat and the cards were dealt. In Beatty's sight, Montag felt the guilt in his hands. His fingers were like ferrets that had done some evil and now never rested, always stirred and picked and hid in pockets, moving from the under Beatty's alcohol flame stare. If Beatty so much as breathed on them, Montag felt his hands might wither, turn over on their sides, and never be shocked to life again. They would be burned the rest of his life in his coat sleeves, forgotten. For these were the hands that had acted on their own, no part of him. Here was where the conscience first manifested itself, to snatch books, dart off with Job and Ruth and Willie Shakespeare, and now in the firehouse these hands seemed gloved with blood. I love how Ray Bradbury brings up this idea that Montag's hands had a kind of a mind of their own. There was this movie in the 90s called Idle Hands, and it was like a horror movie, but it was a comedy about this kid that was always in trouble and never going to school. He was a teenager, and he got his hands were possessed by a serial killer, and so like his hands always wanted to do evil stuff, so his hands had a mind of their own. I cannot remember how they ended up being possessed by a serial killer. Like, I don't understand what happened, but he ends up chopping his hand off because it has a mind of its own and it's trying to hurt people. So it's just that idea that, I mean, we all know that Montag's hands don't have a mind of their own, but Montag is just having a hard time accepting that there's a part of him that's questioning what he's always known in his life. And I think all of us go through that in our lives. We get older and we kind of start to question what we believe. What we believe many times is what our parents have taught us about politics and religion and just anything in general, like our general belief system. And then we start to become an adult and come into our own and decide what we believe. And sometimes what we end up believing is different than what we've been taught. And so Montag is in this very difficult place where he's 30 and now realizing what he's done his entire life and everything he's believed in, including his occupation, is a lie and is evil. So he's struggling to admit that this is something that he's coming into, and that his hands don't have a mind of their own, that he is doing this. Twice in a half an hour Montag had to rise from the game to go to the latrine to wash his hands. When he came back, he hid his hands under the table. Beatty laughed. Let's have your hands in sight, Montag. Not that we don't trust you, understand, but... They all laughed. Well, said Beatty, the crisis is past and all is well. The sheep returns to the fold. We're all sheep who have strayed at times. Truth is truth. To the end of reckoning, we've cried. They are never alone that are accompanied with noble thoughts. We've shouted to ourselves. Sweet food of sweetly uttered knowledge, Sir Philip Sidney said. But on the other hand, words are like leaves, and where they must abound, much fruit of sense beneath is rarely found. Alexander Pope. What do you think of that, Montag? So Beatty is throwing out all of this knowledge he has from books. And we can all agree right now that he's confusing, and he's confusing Montag. I don't know. Careful, whispered Faber, looking in another world far away. Or this: a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Parison spring. Their shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. Pope. Same essay. Where does that put you? Montag bit his lip. I'll tell you, said Beatty, smiling at his cards. That made you for a little while a little drunkard. Read a few lines and off you go off the cliff. Bang, you're ready to blow up the world, chop off heads, knock down women and children, destroy authority. I know. I've been through it all. I'm all right, Montag said nervously. Stop blushing. I'm not needling. Really, I'm not. Do you know, I had a dream an hour ago. I lay down for a cat nap, and there was this dream. You and I, Montag, got into some furious debate on books. You towered with rage and yelled quotes at me. I calmly parted every thrust. Power, I'd said, and you'd quote Dr. Johnson and said, knowledge is more than the equivalent of force. And I'd said, well, Dr. Johnson also said, dear boy, that he is no wise man that will quit a certainty for an uncertainty. Stick with the fireman, Montag. All else is dreary chaos. Don't listen, whispered Faber. He's trying to confuse. He's slippery. Watch out. Beatty chuckled. And you said, quoting, truth will come to light. Murder will not be hid long. And I cried in good humor, oh God, he speaks only of his horse. And the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. And you yelled, this age thinks better of a gilded fool than of a threadbare saint in wisdom's school. And I whispered gently, the dignity of truth is lost with much protesting. And you screamed, carcasses bleed at the sight of the murderer. And I said, patting your hand, what? Do I give you the murder? Do I give you a trench mouth? And you shrieked, knowledge is power, and a dwarf on a giant shoulder sees the furthest of the two. And I summed my side up with a rare serenity in the folly of mistaking a metaphor for a proof, a torrent of verbiage for a spring of capital truth. And oneself of an oracle is inborn to us, Mr. Valery said once. Montag's head whirled sickeningly. He felt beaten unmercilessly on brow, on eye, on nose, lip, chin, on shoulders, on unflailing arms. He wanted to yell, no, shut up, you're confusing things, stop it. Beatty's graceful fingers thrust out to seize his wrist. God, what a pulse. I've got you going, haven't I, Montag? Jesus God, your pulse sounds like the day after the war. Everything but sirens and bells. Shall I talk some more? I like your look of panic. Swahili, Indian, English lit, I speak them all. A kind of excellent dumb discourse, Willie. Montag, hold on. The moth brushed Montag's ear. He's muddling the waters. Oh, you were scared silly, said Beatty, for I was doing a terrible thing and using the very books you cling to rebut you on every hand, on every point. What traitors books can be. You think they're backing you up and they turn on you. Others can use them too, and there you are, lost in the middle of the moor, in the great welter of nouns and verbs and adjectives. And at the very end of my dream, along I came with the salamander and said, going my way? And you got up in and we drove back to the firehouse in a beefric silence. All dwindled away to peace. Beatty let Montag's wrist go, let the hand slump limply on the table. All's well that's well in the end. Silence. Montag sat like a carved white stone. The echo of the final hammer on his skull died slowly away into the black cavern where Faber waited for the echoes to subside. And then, when the startled dust had settled down about Montag's mind, Faber began softly. All right, he's had his say. You must take it in. I'll say my say too in the next few hours, and you'll take it in. And you'll try to judge them and make your decision as to which way to jump or fall. But I want it to be your decision, not mine and not the captain's. But remember that the captain belongs to the most dangerous enemy to truth and freedom, the solid, unmoving cattle of the majority. That is powerful. He is in the cattle of the majority, the solid, unmoving cattle. Have you guys ever heard that before? You're like sheep, you're like cattle, you go together, you don't question things, you don't want to make things better, you just do whatever you're told. Captain Beatty is a part of the solid, unmoving cattle of the majority. Oh God, the terrible tyranny of the majority. We all have our harps to play, and it's up to you now to know with which ear you'll listen. Montag opened his mouth to answer Faber, and was saved this error in the presence of others, when the fire bell rang. The alarm voice in the ceiling chanted. There was a tacking sound as the alarm report telephone typed out the address across the room. Captain Beatty, his poker cards in one pink hand, walked with exaggerated slowness to the phone and ripped out the address when the report was finished. He glanced perfunctorily at it and shoved it in his pocket. He came back and sat down. The others looked at him. It can wait exactly 40 seconds while I take all the money away from y'all, said Beatty happily. Montag put his cards down. Tired, Montag? Going out of this game? Yes. Hold on. Well, come to think of it, we finish this hand later. Just leave your cards face down and hustle out to the equipment. On the double now. And Beatty rose up again. Montag, you don't look well. I'd hate to think you were coming down with another fever. I'll be all right. You'll be fine. This is a special case. Come on. Jump for it. They leaped into the air and clutched the brass pole as if it were the last vantage point about a tidal wave passing below. And then the brass pole, to their dismay, slid them down into the darkness, into the blast and the cough and the suction of the gaseous dragon roaring in life. Hey! They rounded the corner in a thunder and a siren, with concussion of tires, with scream of rubber, with the shift of kerosene bulk in the glittery brass tank, like the food in the stomach of a giant, with Montag's fingers jolting off the silver rail, swinging into cold space, with the wind tearing his hair back from his head, with the wind whistling in his teeth, and him and all the while thinking of the woman, the chafe women in his parlor tonight, with the kernels blown out from under them by neon wind, and a silly damned reading of the book to them. How like trying to put out fires with wall pistols. How senseless and insane. One rage turned in for another, one anger displacing another. When would he stop being entirely mad and be quiet, be very quiet indeed? Here we go. Montag looked up. Beatty never drove, but he was driving tonight. Slamming the salamander around the corners, leaning forward high on the driver's throne, his massive black slicker flapping out behind so that he seemed like a great black bat flying above the engines, over the brass numbers, taking the full wind. Here we go to keep the world happy, Montag. Beatty's pink, phosphorescent cheeks glimmered in the high darkness, and he was smiling furiously. Here we are. The salamander boomed to a halt, throwing men off in slips and clumsy hops. Montag stood, fixing his raw eyes to the cold, bright rail under his clenched fingers. I can't do it, he thought. How can I go at this new assignment? How can I go on burning things? I can't go in this place. Beatty, smelling the wind through which he had rushed, was at Montag's elbow. All right, Montag. The man ran like cripples in their clumsy boots, as quickly as spiders. At last, Montag raised his eyes and turned. Beatty was watching his face. Something the matter, Montag? Why, said Montag slowly, you've stopped in front of my house. Girl, bye. Who do you think done told on Montag? All at once? Mildred. Right. So he's standing in front of his own house, and they're about to burn it. It gets crazy in part 3. So we're stopping there today. You guys have a discussion board, and you need to make sure that you're working on your one pager. I'm going to make an announcement also about your timeline and your first quiz, so make sure you're watching the announcements for that. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you guys have a really nice weekend as much as you can in all this quarantine business, and I hope to see you soon. See you later, alligators.